I don't know how many times you've been asked the question, but I'm sure some of you have. What do you want to be when you grow up? Now, some of you may have some really good answers already, what you want to be when you grow up. Some of you probably are still deciding, you're not sure yet what you would like to do. But I wonder how many of you answered that question by saying, well, when I grow up, I want to be a saint. Oh, I take the laughter is not too often, huh? And most people who ask that question, that's not the answer they're expecting. They're expecting that you want to be a doctor, a worker, a teacher, something like that. And that's good. That's very good. We need good Catholic doctors. We need dedicated Catholic educators. We need hard-working laborers. But if that's all the farther down you go, there's a problem with that. It's kind of shallow. You know, it's one thing, first of all, to say, well, I'm not sure what I want to do yet. And so you dig a little bit deeper and say, well, this is what I think I'd like to do with my life. But if you stop there, you have an avocation, you have a job, but is that what your whole life is about? You have to dig even a little bit deeper than that. It's kind of superficial to stay at any of those upper levels. There's an old play called Gideon, and it's based on the book of Judges in the Old Testament. And Gideon is supposed to fight the Midianites. And so he starts off by being very bold about it, and he says, for the Lord and for Gideon, for the Lord and for Gideon. And then as the play goes on, God's voice gets a little bit quieter. And he says, for Gideon and for the Lord, for Gideon and for the Lord. And at the very end of the play, God's voice is off stage, and Gideon doesn't even hear it anymore. And that's a possibility for us, that if we stay on that shallow level and we just sort of float along with the culture, eventually we begin to lose that sense of God's presence and the ability to hear God. At best, you might look like a Catholic, but on the inside, you're empty. On the worst, you don't even practice anything. And Christ deserves better than that from his disciples. We are called to live our faith from the inside out. So what does that look like? Well, let me use a couple of examples. The first example I would use is the difference between a thermometer and a thermostat. Now, a thermometer tells you the environment. If we pick a thermometer in this room, we might say it's 71 degrees. If you took it outside, it's kind of humid, it might say 75 degrees. It doesn't do anything to the environment, it just records the environment. A thermostat changes the environment. If you said, boy, it's still hot in here, I'd say there's a thermostat on that back wall right over there. Go turn it down. When I was a pastor, I always wanted to put a phony thermostat in the back of church and say, oh yeah, go turn it down, because they wouldn't know the difference anyway. But it changes the environment in which you are. And so the question for a disciple is, am I a thermometer? Do I just go along with what everybody else is doing? If they're doing something over here, that's where I'm at. If they're doing something over here, that's where I'm at. I act very differently with my friends because that's how they act. I act very differently with my family because that's how they act. But a thermostat, which we all should be, we should be changing the environment. We should be actively and positively changing the place around us. If we're filled with the knowledge of God, if we're filled with God's grace, if the Holy Spirit dwells within us, then any place we are should be different when we leave and for the better. Let me give you another example. There was this little eaglet in a tree, pretty high up tree, and it fell out of the tree, and it kind of fluttered its way down to the ground, but it couldn't fly. And so some farmer came along and picked up the little eaglet, took it to the farm, and put it in the chicken coop with the chickens. And so the little eaglet looked around, saw everybody else pecking the ground. So they said, well, that's what I'm supposed to do. And so it pecked the ground, ate worms, and all of a sudden this beautiful eagle is soaring up above the farm, just soaring up there. And the little eaglet looks up at it, and all the chickens say to him, oh, for heaven's sake, you're a chicken. You can't do that. And so it didn't. It just kept pecking the ground, and finally it died. Never realized the full potential of what it had. It would be really sad, I think, to reach the end of your life and never reach that full potential of God's Spirit within you. You're called to be a child of God. You're called to be a committed disciple. You're called to be a saint. You're called to proclaim the good news. You're called to be of service to others. You're called to spend all eternity with God. And it starts by letting Jesus be the eagle that you see, that you're willing to soar with Jesus. It's from Jesus that you learn how to fly. It's prayer and sacraments and service. It's to have that keen sight of an eagle where you can see what other people are not able to see because of your faith. And it certainly started with your baptism, but it's confirmed and finished today. And not really finished. That reading from Ezekiel today with the dry bones, and gradually the dry bones come back, they get some sinew on them, they get some flesh on them, and finally the Spirit is breathed into them and they come to life. So you're not finished. Confirmation isn't the end, it's the beginning. You're not expected to be complete yet. You're not expected to be total yet, not until you die. But you're expected to be in that process. And so you need the gifts of the Spirit. You need wisdom, understanding, knowledge, so that you make right judgments. You need courage to follow through on what you know are right judgments. And you need to be able to return to the Lord with reverence and a holy fear. And so I think the message of my homily is pretty simple. You are not chickens.